What's poppin', people? It's Dante. This morning we're going to be looking at some photographs that I made throughout my past 3-year journey photographing in black and white. Actually, behind the wall we have new work from Tokyo. And so we're going to look at some photographs and we're going to be discussing layering in street photography. I've been shooting for a decade now and I've used the layering technique all throughout the world. I've originally shot in color and have used layering in nearly all of my photographs, and so it's still a technique that I use to this day and is something that I've mastered throughout my journey that I'm happy to share whatever it is that I know about this thing, because it seems that a lot of people want to understand this way of making photographs, and so I really think that it's simple, and I'm going to try to hopefully in this video make a rapid fire breakdown of 7 different pictures and give you 7 different ideas about how to make pictures using the layering technique. And now the first photo we're going to be looking at is one of my most recent photographs that I made just a week ago, essentially in Tokyo on the streets of the Shibuya Crossing. And so at the Shibuya Crossing there is a lot of chaos, lots of movement, lots of traffic. This is one of the busiest locations in the world. There are constant flow of people moving in and out of the scene. This is a hub of people, needless to say. And in these spaces where there's lots of chaos and lots of people, it's very difficult to put order within our frames, right? And so what is the goal of the photographer? First and foremost, the goal of the photographer is to explore the unknown, to articulate it, and to put order to the chaos within the frame. And so what that means is when you go out into the world and you explore, you're having an experience, you're having this physical experience of moving through space and time. And you're playing a visual game of putting together a frame, meaning photography is a physical pleasure and a visual game, okay? So it's essentially visual problem solving to make a composition and to use the layering technique. And so the most fundamental, easiest way that I can break down in this one video, in this one sentence, how to achieve layering results in your photographs, how to put together a composition, essentially. One must recognize this very simple fact. The photographer is merely responsible for where they position their physical body in relationship to the subject, the background, and when they click the shutter. And so when you look at this photograph, I went to a specific location at the Shibuya Crossing where I could isolate subjects from the background. And so you can see, first and foremost, the thing that I did to set this composition up was I found my background. I set my stage. And so I found this beautiful wall here, this very simple wall. We have a white backdrop where I could essentially wait for subjects to move in and out of the frame in relationship to this woman who was stationary against the wall. And so what I did to achieve this result in this photograph is essentially position my physical body in relationship to the background, the subject in the midground, right, against that background, and then wait as these other subjects moved in and out of the frame, and I click the shutter multiple times, right? I'm making lots of pictures. I'm fishing at the scene. I set my stage. I have my subject, and I'm waiting as more people enter through the composition and have my sort of instinct to click the shutter when I see the people align. Okay, and so really it's extremely simple. Like, I see this crowded chaos of humanity at the Shibuya Crossing, and I think to myself, how can I even make a coherent composition here? How can I isolate subjects here? How can I make sense of the chaos in this unknown place for me? And so I find a person who's alone, who's waiting against the wall. I position myself across from her, and I wait and I watch her in relationship to the people that are moving in and out of the scene against that wall there. And so I made lots of pictures. I simply remained patient, and I think that patience and intuition are 2 of the most critical components a photographer must possess to achieve these results. And so you have to be really patient and click that damn shutter more than less. And so then as people are moving in and out of the scene, I was able to achieve this result in the photograph by being patient, being aware, and then responding to my gut, my instinct to click the shutter as things aligned. And so in Coney Island on the 4th of July this past summer, I went to photograph, and this is a beautiful place to photograph in the summertime. If you've never photographed Coney Island on the 4th of July, it's a must visit for any street photographer. And essentially when I was winding down for the day and the sun was setting, I was with a buddy of mine and he said, let's go out onto the rocks. And so we started to climb across the sea on the rocks. It was very treacherous, very slippery. But once we got to the edge, we were surprised by the scene, and it was a really beautiful scene. These boys kind of just emerged naturally from nowhere, it seemed, and these people became heroes within my photograph. And so once again, I have to emphasize the physical positioning of the photographer. And so my physical positioning at this particular scene is very low. And so the reason why I decided to drop to a low angle is because if I were to photograph from eye level, the subjects would have been sort of sort of not visible against the ocean or whatever other chaos was going on at this particular moment, right? So solving this visual puzzle was simple. I dropped low, and so I separated the people from the sky, firstly. Like, that was the first decision, was to set the background, to set the stage. And then essentially, as I watched as these boys entered within the frame, I was simply trying my best to make more pictures, work the scene. Once again, you have to click the shutter a lot more than less. You can't just make one snapshot and move on with these kind of photos. And so I essentially just dropped to a low angle to separate the subjects, and that was pretty much the solution to this visual puzzle. We have the rocks, right? The rocks are the stage. The beautiful sky is the background, and then the people within the frame are the heroes. And I waited for that moment of the boy on the right-hand side turning to the right-hand side of the frame, and I thought that glance, that gesture, that elevated the moment to something much more impactful, right? The sort of humanity in this frame, I think, is what I was really trying to emphasize, right? We have the beautiful golden light upon the skin of the boys. They almost become like these heroic figures within the frame. And so going from a more, sort of simple scene, using silhouettes, using stationary subjects, kind of just like making a picture in a way that is very much foundational in terms of the principles of layering, to now a little bit more of a dynamic scene, much more about humanity, much more about the gesture, and uplifting these people in the frame as true subjects, right, where they're very much visible and not anonymous. And so there's something to be said about being able to use this layering technique in many different situations and scenes, right? So here on the Coney Island beach underneath the boardwalk, I made this dynamic photograph as people are moving and dancing, and it was a very spontaneous scene. And so you have to really be able to respond to the scene, respond to the moment that's occurring, respond to the situation. You have to be able to sort of adapt. And so at this particular situation, at this moment, this woman and this man was dancing, and they were spontaneously dancing. They were moving rapidly, spinning, twirling, moving left, moving right, up, down, left, right. And so in order to put order to a frame like this, you really have to work the scene, make more pictures, but you also have to be very much hyper aware of your physical positioning, because the physical positioning that I had in relationship to this moment in the background is where everything came together. As you can see, the background is very clean, right? We have that beautiful white background that I achieved through, isolating the subjects against the sort of highlight area in the background from the beach and the sky. And so the interesting thing is, with layering, it doesn't have to be so complex. You don't need a million different subjects. Right here we have 1, 2, 3 subjects, and the hero in the frame, of course, is the woman with her face here in the foreground, and then we have the side character here, which is this man on the right-hand side, her dancing partner. And again, a very spontaneous scene, very difficult to put order to the chaos here. But as I sort of watched this scene unfold and made more pictures and sort of moved my physical body in the right positioning in relationship to the subject in the background, right? This is very critical, because when I was shooting at this scene, a lot of the times the subjects were getting lost within the background, and it's very hard to isolate subjects from the background when they're moving and they're very much active. But at that right moment, as they sort of aligned here against the backdrop that I was looking for, this other subject on the left-hand side spontaneously emerged from the background and adds depth and adds layers to this picture. And so we have 1, 2, 3 subjects from the foreground, middle ground, and background, putting order to chaos under the Coney Island boardwalk as people are moving and something a little bit more spontaneous occurred. And so layering doesn't always happen when you're just fishing at a scene and waiting for people and sort of setting up your stage and your composition. But this photograph is a sort of direct result of being able to be quick on my toes and respond to that situation when it calls for it. And so here in Rome, I simply used the fishing technique alongside the idea that one must set their stage to create the dynamics of a layered composition. Firstly, I found the beautiful light. I knew that if I were to visit this particular location in Rome, I would be able to see the light and the way it casts upon this particular part of the city. And so a street photographer must possess pattern recognition, being able to recognize the light, when it's going to fall, where it's going to fall, being able to recognize the patterns of people, the way that they move, where they're going to be, and where the chaos is on the street. And so then you position your physical body in those places where there's beautiful light, there's people moving, and then you can start to put together your visual puzzle. And so in Rome, we have this beautiful Colosseum here in the background being the first piece to my puzzle that I plugged in at this scene. And so you might be wondering about this composition and how it came into fruition. Well, very simply, I plugged in the Colosseum. Firstly, that's number one. And then secondly, this pocket of light here and this shadow that's casted upon the wall in the bottom left corner was my second piece to the visual puzzle. And so once again, pattern recognition. I'm aware of the background. I'm aware of the light and the way it's falling upon the Colosseum in relationship to that little pocket of light and the shadow play that emerges on the bottom left-hand side of the frame. And so that shadow is not a mistake. That shadow was there, and I was aware and photographed it with intention. And then finally, all I needed to do was wait for my foreground to be filled with a subject walking along the sidewalk in relationship to these other characters here in the background emerging from the shadow area. And so this composition was very much intentional. And so I think it's important to be able to have the ability to intentionally be aware of the patterns in nature and human behavior, be aware of the light, be aware of the gestures, be able to set things up intentionally and photograph with patience and sort of be there and be prepared. But it's also important to be able to respond to your situation that comes your way, and be able to photograph in a variety of ways to achieve these kind of results. And I'm just emphasizing with this video by showing you another result here from Paris with the Eiffel Tower in the background, that this is something that you can carry on with you time and time again with repetition. This is a technique that once you learn once, and once you start to use it a few times and you master it, well, then anywhere you are in the world, you can drop me in Rome, you can drop me in Paris, you can drop me in Tokyo, you can drop me in Coney Island, and I can achieve one of these kind of photographs with lots of dynamics that can even include the famous landmark of the Eiffel Tower, the Colosseum, etc. in the background, because I sort of understand the visual game of photography, simply put. And so again, with this composition, same technique. You find the background, you have the Eiffel Tower, you have 24 hours in Paris, right? I had like 48 hours in Paris. Boom, I set up the Eiffel Tower first night I arrive, and I wanted to make a photo of that iconic scene. And then secondly, I find the subject, similar to the photo I made in Tokyo in the first example in the video, sort of observing this subject that's sort of stationary against the background so that I can then isolate a subject amongst the chaos of all of the foot traffic. For this location is filled with people, as you can see here in the foreground, lots of movement, lots of people, lots of energy, and this sort of frame came together again through patience and being aware of my background, being aware of the subject that I'm interested in, and photographing her with intention in relationship to the chaos that's emerging in the foreground of my frame, and then filling the frame this way, where you can see 1/3 of the frame is filled from the left-hand side with the man who is blurred in the foreground, to the middle of the frame with the woman who is the hero, to the right-hand side of the Eiffel Tower. 1, 2, 3, breaking up the plane from the foreground, middle ground, background. Moving on to Coney Island, once again, using the tower of Coney Island. I don't know if it's a parachute ride, right? This famous iconic sort of amusement ride from Coney Island to fill the background of my frame, setting the stage. But now photographing a much more spontaneous event of a man dunking a basketball here. You can see that is, of course, the decisive moment that I was interested in photographing. But firstly, in order to solve this visual puzzle of photographing this scene, I was very much aware of the background. See, I'm highlighting the horizon here. I'm highlighting this amusement ride in the background, and I'm basically setting my stage in relationship to this basketball hoop here, and of course the hero being the basketball player dunking the ball. And so what I'm trying to say here is this technique is something you can use with repetition, right? I'm aware of the scene. I see some people playing basketball on the beach. This is rare. This is a spontaneous moment. Let me photograph this. And so I position my body in relationship to that moment, right? But in order for me to put order to that moment and to emphasize the dunk and to emphasize the gesture of the man, I needed to position my physical body a bit more low and a bit more offset in relationship to the amusement ride on the left-hand side, so that I could have that emphasized in the background in relationship to the dunk in the foreground to create a more simplified layering technique. Again, layering doesn't need 1,000 different subjects. Layering can simply be a moment in relationship to the background. And I think that is the art of layering. It's understanding the fundamental principles of composition and how to put together a frame. And so it has nothing to do with cramming in a million different things for complexity's sake, but it has everything to do with stripping down to the essentials of the scene and making a photograph that's impactful and easy for a viewer to read and to see clearly this sort of separation between the different subjects and have that sort of intention of, as a photographer, to sort of put order to these different things. And so again, bringing it back with the final example in Tokyo, using the skyline of Shinjuku in the frame and essentially using the most fundamental technique in layering, which is fishing at the scene. Finding the subject that you're interested in, looking at these 3 separate club promoters that are stationary in the middle ground and sort of positioning my physical body in relationship to those subjects and this clean background. We have a white wall that separates these subjects, and of course the skyline here that I believe sets the scene, that sets the stage and gives more depth to this particular image. If we compare this image to the first image from Tokyo, I kind of wanted to wrap up with Tokyo to Tokyo. And so we have the skyline, of course, in the background. We have the middle ground of that clean wall that separates the subjects. And then the club promoters that are stationary in the foreground, essentially. However, one of the interesting dynamics that occurred here is the use of slow shutter speed. And you can see I'm highlighting in yellow these different figures that are sort of moving through the scene as these sort of ghostly figures filling the frame with this more ethereal effect that I achieved through photographing at 1/4 of a second in manual mode and really making a particular frame here to make something a little bit more like surreal, a little bit more abstract that I was trying to achieve in this particular result. But needless to say, the technique is something you carry along throughout all of these different frames, right? You simply have to remember this very fundamental thing with street photography. You're simply responsible for where you position your physical body in relationship to the subject, the background, and when you click the shutter. Meaning, composition is physical, right? Composition isn't so visual. Yes, I have 2 eyes that are connected to my brain that allow me to see and perceive the world with sharp visual acuity. I can see the light, I can see the gestures, I can feel in my gut that instinct that's telling me to press the shutter. But the physical sensations, like the physicality of photography, I think is overlooked, where you're going to have to respond on your toes, drop low, isolate the subjects from the sky, move left, separate that chaotic dancing scene on the right, be patient and still and hold your camera just right so that as people are moving in the frame, you're patient and ready to click the shutter. There's something about the physicality of composition in photography, and I believe that composition, it's very physical. It's not so visual. And I think if you're too caught up in your brain with the visual game, it's going to distract you from these results that you're trying to achieve. If you're thinking too much in your head it's going to be a little bit more difficult from you, honestly. But the reason why I'm breaking down and showing you these visualizations and drawing over my compositions is so that you can understand how I play the visual game in relationship to the physical nature of where I position myself to achieve these different things. And hopefully that comes across in this video. I have many different resources on layering in street photography. If you go to my website at dantesisifo.com, you click on the books tab and you scroll down, we have here the Mastering Layering in Street Photography Guide. If you click on the hyperlink, which is the title, Mastering Layering in Street Photography, it'll actually take you to the blog post where I give you a full breakdown video. I believe it's an hour long, and this entire blog post includes videos, POV, in-depth information on layering. I give you my mindset, mistakes to avoid, case studies, lots of different resources here, contact sheets, etc. And of course, you can download the ebook. I give you a PDF here. There's a table of contents that you can click through to get to different sections. So for instance, you could go to techniques and case studies. And then here I break down a lot more. There's another table of contents with different tips and different ideas where I show you about how I use composition. For instance, here in number 7, we have composition is physical, and I discuss how composition requires you to move your physical body to isolate subjects from the background. You can see I draw over my photographs just like I did in this video, breaking down the compositions and giving you all the details on how I photograph. I also give you behind the scenes videos, like for instance, this layered frame that I made in Mexico City on the mountaintops is a frame that also has a video attached to it where you can watch how the video is made. You click on the link, it'll open up a video press on my website, and you can watch exactly the moment that I click the shutter from my POV, from my GoPro. So I go really in depth with this sort of guide here. If you really want to learn more about layering, check out my website, go to that resource so you can see more breakdowns behind the scenes of my photography, specifically in color. I just wanted to do this video with some new black and white work just to share that it's still possible despite using color or black and white or shooting in a particular way or this or that. And just share some new examples from Tokyo that I think are very much simple. Like the first example that I showed in this video is I think the simplest way for me personally to explain layering. And so hopefully that comes across in this video. Honestly, if these videos seem rushed, if I'm all over the place and stuff, I literally wake up at 3:30, 4:30 a.m. I try my best to wake up as early as possible because the collective consciousness of humanity has decided that we all need to show up to a location and do our time to achieve our, ability to acquire food and resources to survive. So I don't have much time in the day to sort of script videos and things, but I try my best to make videos before I have to report to the bus stop at 6:30 a.m. to get to work. So that's pretty much it for today. I just wanted to share some thoughts on layering. Look forward to more videos to come, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.